Consider that your cup of coffee if you haven't had one yet this morning. Hi, folks. What a pleasure to be back here. It's been a few years, and we spent hours rehearsing this tune just for you. And I cannot introduce everybody because I know Oscar and Mark. I don't remember everybody's name, but we're just getting the ball rolling here. And for me, it's a pleasure to be here because normally when you go to a lot of other places to do clinics, you kind of like, it's where you start from. That's what I'm trying to talk about. And sometimes you have to start from something very basic. But we're talking about here about such a great array of musicians, It's like a cast of millions, as they say. And very good players, people who understand what we're talking about. So we can actually start from somewhere different and take it wherever the music. Oh, thank you. Yeah. And we'll take it to wherever the music will lead. So this is kind of a Jeopardy show in which the answers come in forms of questions. So your questions will be so important for us because some of you might want to join and play with us. Some of you might want to ask questions. Or what is that we're doing? What kind of stuff we think about? Well, if we think, people say the brain and the music, we thought is the brain or the music, which is a good way to look at it. But we started just playing the composition here by, it's actually that song has so many fathers, that's like Maurício Einhorn, Duval Ferreira, Maria Helena Werneck, they all claim credit for this composition called Estamos Aí, which means here we are. For a long time, since the early 60s, this song has been one of the standards of what they call the samba jazz or the Brazilian jazz repertoire. So I'm glad that people played it so beautifully. Usually I have to teach people how to play a song like this. Here I don't. I just have to say, hey, here's the tune. So this being about improvisation, I think some of the things that I like to talk about is the fact that for many people, and people have such a facility, the more, and people start these days at a younger age to have more facility with instruments, which is beautiful. The ability to play clean lines, fast lines, the ability for musicians to actually digest, understand, and consider different kinds of grooves as I'm playing. Now, there was a time when if you played a song like this, people still were trying to lay like bebop lines over this, which can also work depending how you do it. But this is essentially a samba. And being a samba, there are certain characteristics to it, which if you improvise over that, you have to recognize and understand what they are. Some of them, of course, have to do with the rhythmic delivery of the music, because being a samba, there are certain kinds of syncopations. Mark knows that very well, and how the accents are displayed, and that has reflexes on the harmonic aspect, because we tend to anticipate the chords, whereas in a lot of jazz tunes we tend to delay the chords. Yeah, nobody wants to do taran tan tan, taran tan tan. So the taran tan tan, boom boom. So the chords come after as an afterthought of the bar line. In Brazilian music, we don't want to play. So we tend to also anticipate, but so we split more the statistical hits before the beat and after the beat. A lot of times, in samba especially, we tend to do these things before the beat. So you probably heard not only me, but Mark and Oscar and the guitarists too, playing hits, the chords, before they actually occur on the beat. So this is a big thing that many people, when they want to play the music of Brazil especially, it kind of like goes over their head. So they always want to do the chords afterwards, and that is right there one big thing to keep in mind. And having the chord be anticipated, even if you talk, we're probably talking about not even a second. It's like maybe milliseconds or hundredths of a second before the downbeat is already enough to, like in a car, when you turn on the corner, you put the blinkers, you let the people behind you know, I'm turning right here. So harmonically, by just, that's it. That's the space. That's less than a second. That's enough to already signal to a musician who's improvising or to a drummer that here we go. Estamos aí, basically, is what the title of the song says. Here we are, here we're going. So it points a direction, a rhythmic flow, a rhythmic motion that puts into effect what we know as dynamic balance. So dynamic balance is the balance of things which are in motion versus static balance, which is the things that are not in motion. Like the piano is in static balance right now. Unless we have an earthquake, I hope not. The piano will stay there. If we don't do anything to it, even if I play on it, it tends to remain in place. Music, however, is not like that. Music is more like a bicycle. Bicycle, and it's just sitting there. It's not being a bicycle. It's just being a bunch of iron and tires and everything. But when you start moving on the bike acquires a certain kind of balance that it never had when it was stationary. So we do that with music. We try to juggle as we're flying. And that's hard to sometimes talk about, because every time we have to stop to talk about something, well, we stop and then the music is gone. So it's an interesting thing. We have to deal with things that are on the fly and at the same time try to derive from that some kind of basic parameters that we can share, like I'm sharing with you guys right now. But people tend to view this very differently, how they study, where they come up from. So I have to say my basic background, I approach music because I actually have a degree in biology, and that's where I come from. So I try to see this, how do we as human biological beings, we react to the music that we play? Because music is an amazingly human characteristic, whether you look at it from the harmonic point of view, from the melodic point of view, or from the rhythmic point of view. We do certain things that no other species do. And because of that unique capacity, I started to think, why is that so? All vertebrate beings have hearing. Hearing is a sense that's actually pretty universal. Whether you're talking about dolphins or bats or fish, they listen with the sides of their body. But we all have some kind of a perception of vibration. But in music, human beings making music, we have something very unique here. So I try to think about how we could connect these worlds a little bit more. And that's a little bit what I'm talking about. But I don't want to make this sound too scary. Don't run away yet screaming. There will be time for that later. But what we're trying to do here is talk about perception of the musical elements of music, of melody, harmony, and rhythm as basically very organic things. Organic because they are related to our organs, to our organism. And a lot of times what I found in studying music and teaching music is that many times that the approach to music becomes something which is essentially very flat and very linear. Even if you want to study the human body, many times you actually have to dissect people who are no longer living so you can look at their organs. In music, you cannot do that, because when we stop the music, there's no music. So when we're playing, so I'm trying to find out what kind of models could we apply to the making of music, which are actually models which are not flat and not linear. So I'm starting to look at things. I'm looking at a chord like at this chord, C major 7th chord. All of you have seen that, and you know how to write it down on the staff and put those nice little, I call them burger chords, little patties one on top of the other, so you can kind of deal with it in a linear fashion. But I'm trying to think more of this chord, let's say a cauliflower, more of something, I call this actually the arboreal concept, because it's you really try to imagine the chord as a living unit, and that's one chord. Just like a living thing that has, of course, like a tree has a root, the chord also has a big fat note that anchors it down. But then as you start to open it, doesn't matter how inverted, how I stretch it, that chord is still connected to. And these things up here, they're all very simple structures. They're actually, the way I look at it, it's just basic simple triads. The C major chord, that was arpeggio like an E minor triad, G major, D major, B minor. So all these triads are hanging. They're really, I start to visualize this as a fourth dimensional structure, actually, because not only has depth, width, and breadth and height, but it's also moving. So the other biological relationship there is that instead of thinking as theoretically, we always tend to examine chords by calling them the root first and looking at the chord up from the root. That's a very terrestrial way of looking at it. If you be a snake walking around the ground, you look at the tree and you go sniff up snakes don't sniff. Well, they do with their tongue. So just kind of go up the tree and down, and you always kind of tend to imagine the scales and the modes always starting from the one, which makes sense. It's a very linear approach. It's not wrong at all. It's one of them. What we kind of lost is that our forebears, our great uncles, they actually lived up on the canopy of the trees before they came down to the ground. And by living in that three-dimensional space of the tree canopy, where think spider monkey, think Tarzan, if you will, you can actually move from layer to layer using connectors, or a vine, or a bungee cord, or triads. which are very elastic because you can stretch them. And so the triad is not the only one, but that's a very practical way. So really thinking of how we can connect from one chord to the next chord, to the next chord, to the next chord, but instead of having to come down, okay, this song we just played was a G major 7th chord, and then we had an A flat major, and then back. So this is there's one way of calling them chords as they are and go up the stem or the root or the trunk of each one of them, or you can actually float from one to the other using the canopy, which is basically, we are basically like a troop of spider monkeys flying through the canopy of the tree. We all know which tree we're on top of. We're not unaware of that. But instead of having to think of it in terms of its linear structure, linear theoretical structure, we think of it in terms of as a nonlinear practical structure. That we are by nature equipped to deal with much more, because that is part of our DNA. It's part of how we respond to music. The other thing is to look at the chords, and I'll talk to this only a little bit, so don't be scared. It's not going to be fully out there. But it's also an interesting thing. I thought about this a lot, about how, if you take one triad, as in, that's the G major triad, and I take another triad like the D triad, or the E minor, or the B minor, and I put them all together. Each one of these triads with 3 notes becomes like a side of a 3-dimensional structure that could be visualized as let's say a tetrahedron, kind of like, looks back again like the little cauliflower. And here's the G major, here's the E minor, here's the B major. And they have a lot of notes in common, of course. Like the D belongs in several of these notes. The E belongs in several of those. The A and the F sharp belongs in several of those. So being able to put them together, imagine, we actually very close to what is actually the building blocks of all of us, which is carbon. The carbon molecule actually has that shape. So we are creatures of carbon. Not only we are made of that, the stuff, we actually put that stuff in our cars to drive it. We actually put it on our fingers when we put the diamonds and everything. While we breathe, it comes out, has carbon in it. So everything is we're so carbon-based. Maybe if we live in a planet that the whole chemistry was based on ammonia, we'll be playing very different chords and very different rhythms. I don't know, I haven't been there yet. But living on the Earth, who knows, it might come up soon. But living on this planet, there's a certain feeling to what people say, what feels natural. That's a very strange word, because people go, oh, it sounds natural. I mean, it sounds natural to one person, might sound completely weird to another one. But these are things that really belong to what we are. So I'm just trying to bring to music something that all children already have. That people who sing music intuitively, people who sing in a tribal context, or people who sing when they're just whistling on the street as they're walking about. If you look at what people do when they do this, they're basically playing music that's all triadic. But the one thing is, if you say like a super triadic melody, for instance, like right? So on. This is a very triadic thing, but it doesn't have to be this way. If I would treat this as being one simple tree with a root very close to with a branch very close to the root, this is what it sounds like. But I can start to move. I'm playing this O Susanna in the key of C. So now I just move like the root to B flat, and I have. Or in the key of F. Or in the key of D minor. Or so many other possibilities, and suddenly that melody that was so it becomes whoa. We start to place this melody up on the upper branches of the tree, and giving us the option to actually relate. My goal is actually to be able to connect the intuition that we all have, and if we didn't lose it, we still keep it from when we were kids. I do workshops with like kids all under 5 years old, and they do this so naturally. You just start singing stuff that they sing back to you, and they learn very complex rhythms, just clapping. We don't know, this is 11/4. No, they just clap 11/4, and they'll be clapping back to you. You don't have to say the number. So in other words, when we relate to this very intuitive sense, the music that we make tends to have that kind of like, I call this organic, but not because you can buy it at Whole Foods. It's more organic because it's really behave like an organism. Is this too crazy? Okay, I don't scare anybody. I have to be careful here. But so I just said these things, but it's nice. We played some music, so I think it would be nice to play some more music. But before we do that, if anybody has any questions, hopefully you do. But we can take it forward from there. And is this triggering anything going like a little? What? Yes, back there.
So do you view everything sort of as a scientist? Would you say?
Say it again. I'm a musician, first of all. Science can be very linear, too. So all I'm doing is I'm borrowing the experience of people that have seen this thing before. We tend to, in most of our day-to-day life, we either deal with things like when we still say, like, okay, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. No, it doesn't. But we still talk about like this. The earth is actually moving to the west, which makes the sun. Or we say the wind is blowing from the north. No, it's not. There's a low pressure that's sucking from the other side, from the south, so it looks like the wind is coming from the north. So we still have not dealt, actually, in our day-to-day life, we're still dealing the world as a flat place. And most of our day-to-day life, we still deal with the physics of Newtonian physics, which are beautifully created, and so nothing's wrong with it. It just works only on a certain scale. But the moment people started to look at scientists started to look at the very large or the very small, they found that things were not so flat and linear. And music deals with the very large and the very small. And because of that, we approach and unfortunately, the study of music, when it first started, music started to be codified in theories and ways to define it, it was following the precepts of science, but it was following the precepts of science at the time. But as science and physics have expanded to understand the cosmos and the universe, music kind of stayed there on the apple falling on Isaac Newton's head. But we are actually, when we play music, we're actually dealing with the vibration of a chord like this. The one I played like a few minutes ago, it's very far from here, but still it's like ripples on a pond. It's still going. So we deal with basically matching vibrations. If I play a chord and Oscar just goes boom, he finds the note of that chord, he plays another note that's not the one. We're making vibrational conversation here. And if Mark does a special kind of boom, bah, that is also vibrational talk. So ultimately, we're just manipulating vibrations here. And it might sound like a bit like too much new age talk, but I like to think of it as no age talk. Is that because this is music that, it's really, I think my musical mentor, Hermeto Pascoal, he talks about music being a universal force. And I think it's very true. It's like the wind, it's like the water, it's like the clouds, it's like gravity. So things which affect not only on a planetary scale, but also on a much larger scale. So in that sense, it's really universal. Yes?
So what are some of the fundamental ways you apply that philosophy?
I would say that some of the basic, that's a really good question. Practically speaking, I try to, every time I find myself running along a very straight line in anything in music, whereas the urge to play a scale or urge to voice my chords, and I try to run away from that. I try to substitute, instead of playing things in this linear, symmetrical way, of something which is non-symmetrical, non-linear. So by just reverting, I've just folded the same notes. I've just folded them and included. So same thing, if I'm thinking of playing a series of harmonic progression, it could be anything, the blues, any standard, any tune you want. It could be very simple to just think. All the notes are right, but there's happen to be, because they're so put together, and then you start you have the feeling, and I know that many musicians feel that when they're actually playing, they're actually like a little train running on a rail, in which, what comes after one station, the next station, and after a station, the next one. And then you turn back, and you have all the stations in the reverse order. This is a linear aspect. And if you study a lot of scales, a lot of modes and stuff in a linear way, that's the first thing you think. So in other words, I'm trying to substitute, instead of thinking like a train, which is okay too. Having straight lines is not bad. Just like if you draw, sometimes you need to put a ruler there and make a straight line. But if all your art is made of straight lines, it's going to sound a little it's going to start to look a little funny. It's just that people say, wow, because nothing in our bodies is actually straight. Start with my hair, it's like it's not. So we just try to find the things which are not straight, and every time you start to make things which are curved, they start to obey other kinds of proportions. And people talk about looking at spirals, Fibonacci series, all those things which are belong to another world. So breaking this into, instead of the train, you're the helicopter. You still know where the line goes to, but you can pick and choose the points where you touch. And one of the best tools to do that is actually thinking intuitively as a triads, because as much as our minds have expanded in their capacity to understand very large quantities and very small quantities, we're still beings with 5 fingers on each hand. And I like the fact, like in Brazil, the natives from Brazil, they have a system of counting which goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a lot. That's good. I like that. If you can deal with all your daily interactions with music, with things that nothing is bigger than number 5, and the triad is perfect for that. But remember, the triad doesn't mean only or. Actually, that's the way that the triad sounds the worst, because it's linear. I like to think of the triad more as surrounding the note that will be like the center of the triad, putting it in the center. So that's what we call in music the second inversion. So now when I play the C major like this, I actually see the C, the note C in the center, and the G and the E kind of like as an uneven cone. We call this in physics a gravity well. So if you play the notes kind of like a pinball machine, like a funnel, or like a black hole, or like your kitchen sink when you wash dishes, kind of like, that's a gravity well. But if we put, instead of putting the roots there, we put another triad, and another triad, we can build up this cauliflower, chord, leaf flower. There it goes. And you put this together, and these things start to actually have a feeling. That is we call this organoleptic, because it's like something that, I don't have to say it's a major 7 chord. Most of you can recognize one of those without me telling you that it's that, because you recognize it by the sound of it. There's a sensation. And for musicians, that qualifies as 3 things. It's what we hear, the most important. We hear, oh, that tastes like, smells like a major 7 chord. It also feels like one, because when you play it, whatever instrument you play, there's a shape, there's a tactile experience to that. If piano, guitar, or accordion, or vibraphone, or the bass, there's something that means that to you that translates as a shape. And number 3 is the vision, because if I actually know it's a C major 7 chord and I write it, I know how to write it. So there's 3 things which connect: the eyes, the skin, and the ears. The ears, of course, being first, because that's what music is. But we support the hearing with all the other things. Remember, not all vertebrates can see, but almost all vertebrates, naturally, they can hear something. So it's a more basic sense. Any more? Yes?
So how do you marry that harmonic way of looking at things with rhythm and melody? How do you combine all?
Cool. That's a very cool thing, because, well, I happen to be from Brazil, and we had musicians here who know the Brazilian groove very well. So I'm speaking specifically about that one Brazilian groove we were playing. So we apply all this now to a matrix of rhythmic displacements that creates what we call, that kind of sounds like Brazilian or samba-like, or you might be even more specific. This is a series of, we're talking about time, and we're talking about rhythm as being not only note durations. A lot of people, see, the linear aspect, when you look at it, I've read many books about rhythm, they say, rhythm is a series of durations. No, it's not. It's much more complex than this. Just like harmony has all these layers, rhythm also does that. So especially a rhythm like the samba, that it actually becomes very complex, because it doesn't have only one side to it. Like Mark plays the drums, what he does on the kick is not the same thing he does on the cymbals, on the snare. He's basically actually physically layering these things rhythmically in a way that, that's my little particle accelerator here. It's like, they use that in science when you want to discover. So if I just go like this, I'm actually taking advantage of the articulations in my hand, plus the fact that this has 2 sides. So I can say, So every time that I hit one of those syncopated notes, I know that actually the little pebbles in there, actually it's actually buckshot. I don't know how they let me fly with this thing. And actually, it's actually hitting the back side of it. Where if I go, it's on the front side, it's on the back side. So I'm actually placing this rhythmic information on a very specific surface, which this helps me. So when I'm not playing this, I'm playing the piano or I'm playing with the drummer, I'm actually visualizing music not only as the durations of the notes, but more as the notes placed in a matrix, which is actually in itself fourth dimension. I'm more like we have this kind of spheres or bubbles that surround us. And when we talk about meters, like people have sometimes scared of like odd meters or what they call numbers like 7 or 5 or 9 or 11, 13 as being, I have to count, because immediately you think of the typewriter effect. Now we go, you get to the end of the carriage and people used to know what a typewriter is, right? Yeah, it makes pling at the end of a line and then you pull it back to the beginning. So this, we don't think of this anymore. We think of like big waves, and sometimes a wave can take 2 or 3 measures to go back to and not even that is a downbeat. That's also syncopated. But you know that's what we play. We're basically playing a game of multi-dimensional ball here, tossing it back and forth, and having a lot of fun doing that too. Because it's like, in that sense, I'm like a dog. You know, just throw the ball and I'm gonna catch it. I'm gonna throw the ball back. So it's the same excitement that you see when dogs like to play ball. I mean, they can do it the whole day long. We can play music all day long, because it's that kind of fun. And when you place this kind of rhythmic complexity, but felt in a simple way, with a harmonic complexity, which is felt in a simple way, and outlining that with melody patterns that are basically coming from intuition and not from an artificially lined straight line, we start to have fun when we play music. And I think people feel this when they hear it too. This is not, I'm really thinking of from the point of view of the listener, who's listening and basically connecting with the music at much more than just an intellectual level, connecting the music at a very organic level. Wow, I like the way this makes me feel. I like what I hear. And then and that doesn't imply that anybody has to play the music in any one particular way. Yes, you can play linear too. It's fun. It's good to play straight lines once in a while, but if you can only play straight lines, then something's lacking. Make sense? Okay.
You spoke really quickly about using these triads or using mechanides as a way of navigating between chords.
It can be used in 2 different ways. I love this question. Really good house here. Guys, I like this question. It's good. Number 1, yes, you can have a series of chord changes, like we look at the changes on a chart, and we can use that. It's given to us that we have this harmony changes, progression of chords, and then we can skip around and back and forth in so many different ways. The other way of doing it is the opposite, where you are, let's say, you are reharmonizing a melody that already exists, like what I did with the O Susanna thing there. A melody is already there. I'm not changing the melody. I'm actually placing the melody over different kinds of canopies, because we can either look that way. I'm looking down at possible roots, and at any note I have like 4 or 5 options or more, depending how much chordage I know or I remember intuitively. And you can do, okay, I can go there. In other words, if you're the spider monkey navigating along a set line, you're going for a certain direction, following a melodic line, you can choose which path you're going to take. I'll go this way, and the next time you go through, you can choose another way, and it's all good, because necessarily those are possibilities. I believe in giving musicians options. I don't think that if I qualify musicians as being like, it doesn't really matter how old you are, where you were born, where you went to school. Those things are important, but ultimately, what you want to give musicians is how many options do you have. Some people have one way of playing things. It's okay. Sometimes it's beautiful, and nothing wrong with that. But if you want to be more versatile, more ways to actually engage musically with a different group of musicians, and that's something that I love to do. I love traveling. I love meeting people, and I love playing people from music from different cultures. A couple of years ago, I was in India playing with a band, and I was the only known Indian in the band. I kind of says, okay, that's a very different forest for me, and let's jump around there. And I mean, it was a huge learning experience, which I loved very much. I learned a lot of things that I bring back into my own music making. And or I might play with classical musicians or with chamber musicians or with jazz musicians or with folk musicians, and they're all bringing some different parameters to their playing. And I look at all this as ways of making music, and not necessarily have to align them on a certain linear scale of better and worse. I think in every style of music, you can make things which sound good to you and will connect. I think more important is the connection. Playing music alone is a lot of fun. Playing music together is 50 times more fun. Play music together in front of people who are together, listening to the music being played together, that's like exponentially so much better. So it's that level of that equation that we like to do. That was it? Help your question there? We should play some more, guys. I like those. Yes, let's bring some of these guys back up here. You can pick a tune. Pick one that I know. Or pick one that I don't know. Yeah, let's do Influência do Jazz. That's actually Carlos Lira, great composer from the Bossa Nova period in Brazil. He's still alive. He's still playing, great composer. The late 50s, early 60s in Brazil was a time of great harmonic expansion. And Carlos Lira wrote a song. And it's actually something very interesting about this song. The lyrics of that song says as things is poor samba. It's been subject to all these influences, and the jazz has become such a big influence in samba, but it's forgetting something, because it says the samba moves from side to side, and jazz moves back and forth. And then on the bridge it says, and there's also the Afro-Cuban, which does something else with it. So each one of the parts of the song actually talks about a different way of moving. And I will play the song, but remind me to talk about this kind of like body alignment in relationship to the music, because that's one of the biggest issues that I find when playing with other music. A lot of people, I don't know anybody who does not like Brazilian music. But a lot of people, they like it, but they look at it from the outside and they immediately project into it everything that they think they know about music, and sometimes that leads to some misunderstandings. We'll talk about this after we play the song. So, yeah, let's just play it. Is it in the D? That's why there is, right? Yeah. Yeah, so let's do it kind of like a little slower so we can kind of think about it a little bit. I'll set you up this. Let me try to remember this. Yeah. Thank you, guys. Great playing. And this is fun because what's happening is that we are doing a kind of conversation. And then hopefully you guys are catching on to the conversation and enjoying that because we're out hanging on this big jumping, those nets. It's kind of like a net, a big trampoline. And we all jump on this trampoline. So that means that one person jumps higher, the other one kind of like bounces with that. So we're really connected in this kind of like multiple ways. And even thinking this way, just thinking that what we do, every note that everyone plays is somehow bounced back by somebody else in one way or another. And sometimes it's so much fun to actually not to play, to just stand back and just watch, to just feel that energy bouncing. And sometimes we jump back in again, and sometimes we jump out again. So and because of that, we're all like oscillating on multiple levels of relating to the music. And whoever's not playing, like the audience, feeling that is basically watching this kind of like Cirque du Soleil of music, people jumping around and hopefully understanding there's some patterns in there. And we're all following, actually we're not just freely, which we could be too, but in this case we're actually following a cycle of a song that has an AABA structure. So we're using this pattern as a playground. And when we go back and forth, that gives us like the context that we are placing whatever we do on. There's a harmonic context, there's a rhythmic context. This thing, the song goes dan da da dan da da dan da da dan da da dan. That's kind of like the DNA, the rhythmic DNA of the song is this kind of like. And that for me represents what if you want to play the song anywhere, you just have to go. And everybody knows where it's going to go from that point because it already sets it up. So it's kind of like the trademark of that tune. And it's not the only tune that has that, but this one, actually the other one had a similar one. So every song is kind of like a little hook that in a way opens the door to whatever that structure is. It's like a door that opens into a room, and the room has a certain shape. The other song was kind of like a A-B. This is one AABA. So there's structures are also a big important thing. But it's also very important to not think of structure in those linear terms. So everything I do here is I'm trying to break away the sense that everything is lined up along one line. We're thinking of planes and volumes, and those volumes moving with the song. So that's really what's creating this kind of it's a little more complex vision, but at the same time, it's more intuitive because that's the way that we navigate in the world. That's not the world of music. It's the way you navigate when you get out of bed in the morning and find the door, find your coffee. All those things are like, they exist in a universe of space that actually has many dimensions. We're not running along a little rail to those things. This way, today I'm going to drive this way, next day I'm not going to drive, I'm going to take the bus, the next day I'm going to take the bike, the other day I'm going to take a helicopter. And we can do all that with music, so we can use the same matrix of the context of the song to find different ways to navigate. If we would play the song again, chances are things would be very different. We all play different notes, different things would happen in it. We'd kick different kicks. So that's the kind of opening options in music that we like to always make sure that whenever we fall, and it happens a lot in any context of any kind of music, from Cirque du Soleil to playing classical music to playing jazz to playing rock music, is that at one point if you play too much of it and you start to kind of like crystallize certain pathways of playing it, the music starts to play itself naturally, becomes like an automated function rather than being a mindful. And that's the danger because music requires so much motor coordination for you to hold your instrument, play the notes, do the jumps or whatever it is that requires for your instrument to play, that we tend to somehow place that in the same kind of automatic motor coordination that we do like when we brush our teeth or when we drive out of your driveway, in which way that you kind of like, it's already something you do so much that you do it without thinking that you're doing. And when you start to do that with music, it's funny, the audience notices it right away. They notice it by feeling the lack of connection. And that's an important thing because ultimately, as I said, playing music alone is fun. But if you play music alone in a mechanical, repetitive way, like you could sit and go. And you can do that a long time. As people spend hours doing this in the day. And I can assure you, what they're thinking of when they're playing this, they're thinking of their email, they're thinking of what they're going to have for lunch, they're thinking of the girlfriend, the boyfriend, they're going to think of what the score of the game was. They're not thinking about music for a very simple reason. That's not music. You will not pay, I don't know how many hundreds of dollars to see Keith Jarrett in a concert hall and play. I know, because for a very simple reason, it's not music. And so my point of view when I'm saying this, practicing music should be what the name says. You're practicing music. You play music. And a lot of music has very specific technical requirements that sometimes you have to learn some scales and some things like this. But that always, in my view, I'm not necessarily saying that everybody who thinks otherwise is wrong. It's just my own personal view. Is that tends to focus. You train whatever it is that you spend a lot of time doing. That's what you're going to do, right? It's the 10,000 hours of Malcolm Gladwell. You spend 10,000 hours doing something, you're going to become very good at that. So you might become a musician that's like awesome, absolutely fantastic at playing very fast scales or very fast notes, which is, it's an accomplishment. It's kind of like a physical accomplishment. It's kind of like something that people in the Olympic Games, they train for that a long time. But music is not exactly along those lines. You don't get more points for playing the same notes faster or playing bigger jumps or playing more notes all at once at the piano. That doesn't really count much when it comes to music. What really in a way counts is like the ability to connect with this network, which is invisible, but everybody feels. The little children feel it right away. They're like their antennas. They can tell right away if somebody's not connected to the music. What happens? They lose interest. They just go ahead. And that's actually a very good way to I like that. If my music can connect with the babies, I know that it can connect with everybody else after that. So that's an interesting way of thinking about it. Any questions here? Yes?
How come you think it connects with kids faster, quicker?
Because for some reason, I mean, I do workshops at several levels. Here I am at the College of Music, which is wonderful. I teach at the college as well. But I also do workshops in high schools. I do workshops in elementary and middle schools. And some of the workshops where I feel that people catch things right away is actually when I do like the daycare centers. And they have, it's not that they know more, because they don't. But in a way, they're closer to something which is the pure, not only they're closer to just the intuitive aspect of music, because they, sorry?
I'm so sorry. To answer his question is that in those phases of as when we're children, that's how we learn. Our brain is developing, so it's through our senses. That's why they're more connected, and that's the first organ that's the first organ. So we are musical, and that's why they know. They immediately know.
That's a very good answer, right?
why.
I agree with that. And I'll add something else to that. Human beings, it doesn't matter where they're born, where they come from, they are entirely pitch-based. The whole beginning of communication with kids, it doesn't matter. There's something called IDS, which means infant-directed speech, which means you can take a baby in any place of the world and put it in the hands of anybody else, and immediately the human being will switch into a way of talking to the babies, which, by the way, is very similar to PDS, which is pet-directed speech, which is a tonal language. They go, it doesn't matter. I could be saying anything. It's the inflection and the shapes. It's a relative. I could speak it on one key or another, but the relationship between the intervals means something to the kid. If the little baby, I have a grandson, okay? My grandson, he's now running. He can run and try to open the drawers that he's not supposed to open, or try to put his finger in the socket. And you go, no, don't do it. It's actually a very different kind of melody that we sing to the baby when he's doing something he's not supposed to do, or if he's hurting, if he's hungry, or if he needs his diapers changed. Or, so there's that kind of relationship. Same thing with your dog or your cat. We all talk to our animals like this. And it's a very tonal language. It's tonal, meaning the pitch actually matters. Like I could speak English in the voice of, no, I can't. But if I could pretend to speak in the voice of, let's say, Tom Brokaw. And, okay, here's the thing as it's coming out tonight on the news. Or I could be in the voice of, I don't know, Willie Nelson. I don't know. It could be, you still understand what I'm saying. The meaning doesn't depend on the pitches, it depends on what I'm saying. Even though if you say the word what can mean like a million different things. Like I didn't hear what you say, what? Or you just told me some news and I go, what? Or I'm busy and you're trying to talk and say, what? this is the same word in many. So music, we have the notes in many different contexts. So so children are closer to that tonal universe, so they can actually speak and relate to music in a more intuitive way. So what can we do? We cannot really turn back the time and become children ourselves, and we're not. But we can actually try to tap, because that potential. So I look at a guy like Hermeto Pascoal, who's again he's a role model for me, because I learn from him every day. And in a way, if there's something happens, if somebody's cell phone goes off, or a car goes by in the street, he's listening to that like, oh, B flat major 7. There it goes right there. So for him, there's no barriers between what we call silence, signal, or noise. Like signal is something that has meaning, noise is something that has no meaning, and silence is the absence of both. So for him, it's like it's all. If I'm talking like this and he's listening, he's actually hearing me sing, even though I'm not a singer. But he's hearing my voice and he can actually harmonize that because nobody told him he couldn't. Basically, that's it. Good question, though. Yes.
In Africa, that's the way it was for many years in communication between village to village, because they used to play surrogate language on the drums, and the way they speak is the way. And if you go to Guinea and you're listening to or Mali and you listen to the solos, and then you hear them speaking through their instrument.
Yep, that's true. That's true. The concept of the talking drum. And in many countries, I mean, just like the United States, Brazil has a huge influence from Africa, very large. Brazil is even more because we had so many more people come. Nobody knows for sure, but they estimate 7 to 8 million people were brought from Africa to Brazil over the course of the 400-something years of slavery. And there's ways that we talk in Brazil, and you hear this in the United States, and they're all very syncopated. But people say, mm-mm. It's not, mm-mm. It's not, mm-mm. It's like, uh-uh. Right? Mm-mm. It's a super syncopated thing. And because it's that way, we immediately, and what that means in rhythmic terms is that instead of just folding things in two, like we can have, like, right? And that's one. That's in a way what happened in Brazil because the polka, which is a one-fold rhythm, the polka used to be, right? 2/4, very strong on the beat, and the music was like. And in a way, polka was super famous. Back in those days, polka there were rave parties. People played polka for like 3 days in a row. I'm talking about the 1800s, the late 1800s in Brazil. No, it was a big deal. A lot of people sent from Hungary and Vienna and Poland were coming to Brazil to play instruments, violin, flute. And then they asked the musicians, and many of them were like what we call African Brazilians. They're people, either slaves or descendants of slaves or freed slaves. They're playing this music, except that instead of thinking of this way, they were actually hearing more like. So you look at scores of music, let's say, there's a beautiful song. You know Flor Amorosa? Mm-hmm. You play it in D? But it goes. You can do whatever key. Yeah. So this song, originally composed in 1867 or so by Joaquim Antônio Calado, if you buy the score, it says polka. Yeah. So originally, if you play it as a polka, play it a little bit. Okay, so now when you ask somebody to play it as a polka and the person play it again. parts. So this is Flor Amorosa. Nice job, man. Yeah. So it's the same song. But now it totally got articulated with two folds. Everything it was doing. So in other words, we zoomed out of the music and instead of thinking of this. Well, many people do that. You want to play Girl from Ipanema, but say 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, tall, and then a younger, lovely the girl. And people still count like this and they think of the song as being, which is nothing wrong. Remember, I was going to talk about body alignment. That's it. Because when you play music that essentially is folded once, so you have two sides, you are basically dealing with the front and back of the body. Look at everything you described. When we talk about swing, what we call straight ahead jazz or swing, how do we call the bass? What does the bass do? Yeah, walking bass. Okay, that's forward and back. What is that symbol here? What is it called? Oh, right. Yeah, that's also back and forth. And we call it, it's swinging. What is a swing? It's also back and forth. So all these things, I mean, it's a natural human movement. There's two ways of moving. You can go from point A to point B, which is, essentially create what's known as a march. When you have people moving in sync from point A to point B, the only way to do it efficiently, otherwise you have a mob, you don't have a march. The Romans were, of course, created this because they could move 50,000 legions from Rome to, say, Scotland. And the only way they could do it is by putting... And, of course, they named it after the god of war, Mars. That's why it's called a march. And the march is essentially a very one downbeat, down facing, dun, dun, dun. So if you play it's a march. So the snare, what is known in French as caisse de guerre, in the war box. It's a snare. Can you play any march there? It's very... Now he's putting the accents of the frevo which make it float, but essentially it's a march. So the march that's what it is. The other way of people moving is actually when people are not going anywhere. So what happens when people are not going anywhere but are still moving in sync? They get in a circle. So when they get in a circle, there's immediately the hierarchy of who's in the front of the line, who's in the back of the line, who's the general. Suddenly it's no longer there. There might be a person in the center of the circle who is the facilitator of the circle, the hub of that wheel. So the concept of wheel, or we call in Portuguese roda, there's a lot of kinds of music when we talk about this music. Let's talk about roda. We talk about roda de samba, which is the samba wheel, roda de choro, the choro wheel, roda de coco, coco de roda, the coco in the wheel. So a lot of this choro, samba, coco, and a lot of this music takes place in a circle. And when you are in a circle, the whole back and forth things actually runs against the circle because the moment people start moving back and forth, the circle is gone. So immediately the alignment of the body becomes a left and right kind of like alignment. And when you think of this music, instead of thinking like this, if you think of... Now the whole thing is like this. And just that little thing is enough. It's not little, but just that one thing is enough for a lot of people not feel the grooves that we play. And we can, again, it doesn't matter where you're born. Mark is from Central America, Chicago. Look, he plays his grooves so beautiful. And he totally feels it. When we play it with him, it's like suddenly we're all, there's this kind of sideways motion, which is totally different than that motion of them. Which is, both motions are beautiful. I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's just the problem is when you think it's going this way and everybody else is going this way, then you got a basic issue of the oil and water, where you can shake it along, but it all is separate. They never really mesh. So if we're talking about joining things, it's really important to learn about this kind of like body alignment. And then, of course, we are, whether we know it or not, we are articulated creatures. So when we have, all of our articulations, our knees. So there's a natural basic tendency of human beings when they came down from the trees, conquer of the ground was a big thing. That's famous scene in 2001 where one of our ancestors comes down on the ground and they always will run up back to the trees, but when they finally come on the ground and he's able to grab a bone or something and scare away the lion, whatever was eating the same prey he wanted. he conquered the ground. It's like, and we still do that. Every time we celebrate the beginning of a new cycle, we make some kind of a noise. It could be a downbeat. It could be your New Year's Eve celebration with fireworks. It could be everybody singing happy birthday for you. It could be anything, a celebration of an anniversary, a birthday, anything that goes through a cycle. We go, yeah, one more year. So that's a natural tendency. 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, 2, 3, 4, boom. So a lot of the forward motion of the world involves this big downbeats. And then there's all the other syncopation that we get by articulating, which is the sideways thing. So if our feet are the quarter note, then our knees are the eighth notes. So when you're moving around and you're going like this, if I'm just doing that, my knees are already being the eighth note because, if I'm going like this. And then of course, my hips will be the so my hips are the 16th note. And my hands are the quarter note, my elbows are the eighth notes, and my shoulders are the sixth. It doesn't have to be necessarily that for everybody. You can place it wherever you want. But if you have nowhere to place those grooves, those rhythms, if there's not a physical hook for you to hang it, they're going to be just abstract durations. And that's the difference between understanding rhythm as duration and understanding rhythm as articulation. And when we play together, we're articulating those things. That making sense? Cool, we should play some more. Okay, what do you guys want to do? We got a new bass player here. What's your name?
Hey, Flavio.
Flavio, oba. Hey, man. All right, what you guys, pick a tune. Good. What do you want to do? Choose there. So what I did is I sent them these charts before, kind of like pretty simple standards. I have the sometimes when I go somewhere and people say, oh, we're going to play some Latin jazz, some Brazilian music. What tune you guys know? And they go like, blue bossa. And I go, oh, I'm sorry. It's not a blues and it's not a bossa either. What can you do with that? I mean, you can do beautiful things with it. Hernan Lopez Nussa has a beautiful arrangement of that song, which really takes it somewhere. But most people think of a song of a kind of groove that essentially has a lot of syncopation. It's a march, like a lot of other tunes. So it's a great tune. I'm not don't want to be offensive to the composer, but it's not blues and it's not a bossa either. So that was just a time it was just fashionable to call everything a bossa. In Brazil, it was the same thing. Anyway, what do you guys want to do? Huh? Canto de Ossanha, yeah. Canto de Ossanha is a tune that we call, is a part of what we know as the Afro Sambas. Legend has it that Vinicius de Moraes, our great poet, diplomat, and lyricist, I mean, he was above all an amazing poet. And he was a guy he was a published poet much before he got involved with hanging around with Antônio Carlos Jobim, and that, the history of all the songs they wrote together is just gorgeous. But Vinicius de Moraes was insatiable. He didn't want to have just, the same. He got married, I think, like 10 or 12 times in his lifetime. And the same thing with his musical partners. He was always, he was very, in a way, he was always looking for new experiences in the field of writing music. And he connected as a young guitarist. Baden-Powell had studied classical guitar, but Baden-Powell had this fire. He was basically, he was playing the guitar like a kora, the African harp that has a super rhythmic articulations. And Baden-Powell, and the story says that Vinicius de Moraes had a house up in Petrópolis outside of Rio, and they went up there one weekend and they took a couple of cases of Scotch whiskey with them, and they came back with no Scotch whiskey and all the Afro Sambas composed. And that's the legend says that's what happened. And all of it was really tribute to the Orishas, which is the primeval forces of nature that they are worshipped by the Ifa religion from Africa, and that was brought to Brazil under the form of candomblé. It was brought to Cuba under the form of santeria, and so essentially he was looking at creating some very different kind of grooves than, say, the bossa nova that was kind of very prim and very kind of like restrained in its rhythmic. Very, like, say, the drumming bossa nova. There's not much big. It's very intimate. The Afro Sambas are more like ecstatic, in which they really try to build up grooves that are circular. Like this one song, Canto de Ossanha, has a very simple, it's just, there's a bridge, but the main chorus of the song. it's just that. It just keeps going around, and the whole melody goes around and around, and it gets very small and big again, and the bridge opens up. So it's the opposite of bossa nova. It's like out, where instead of being in. And Osain, they might call it Osain in Cuba or Osain in Brazil. It's a very strong orixá, and they say watch out, be careful, because Osain can be treacherous. Don't fall into the story of Osain, because it says love is only worth it if it hurts you. That's yeah. So let's do it. Don't have to do it very fast. Let's just play the groove of the four chords a little bit. Then we do this little intro I wrote. It's just a way to set it up. And then when it goes and then we go back. All right. So let's do kind of like a just to groove a little bit. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Hey!